Hello, my friends. This is Deepak Chopra again, and we are continuing our series on cutting edge science and spirituality. And today it's my great honor and privilege um, to welcome Lynne McTaggart, who I've known for over 20 years. She's a pioneer in understanding the role of intentionality and how intention works. And thank you for joining us, Lynn.
Thank you so much, Deepak. It's great to be with you.
So we know in these uh, podcasts or whatever you want to call them, these conversations, I've realized that most of the world doesn't know who I am or who you are. So can you start by giving us a little idea about your career, what you do now, how you got interested in this whole domain of intentionality and how it works? But let's start from the beginning, where you grew up, what your profession was, and where you are now.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and my desire from a young age was to be a writer. And I got very interested in journalism and the idea of investigative reporting when I was a young teenager and I saw Woodward and Bernstein, take down a corrupt president. And to me, I thought, wow, that's, to be a member of the Fourth Estate and to hold governments and things to account was just my idea of perfection. So I started out my life in my 20s as an investigative reporter. And my work was doing things like uncovering baby selling rings, with hidden tape recorders and all that sort of thing. And I busted a number of baby selling rings around the world. I got interested in medicine and questions about alternative medicine after that, really after I got ill, and no one could tell me what was wrong with me. So I went from the very conventional approach to the very outer rim of alternative medicine. And this was back in the 80s. Nobody could sort me out. So I finally thought, well, I might have to take control of this myself. And I researched what I thought I had. And I found a pioneering doctor, nutritional doctor, an integrative specialist, as we'd call him today, who figured out my problem was a faulty microbiome, which is very common now, but wasn't then. And so because it was such an interesting and heady new experience, I got very excited about it and probably pretty boring on it too, Deepak. I was telling everybody, and my husband finally said to me, "Stop telling me, tell the world." So we set up a magazine, well, a newsletter back then called What Doctors Don't Tell You, which was all about conventional, what works and what doesn't in conventional and alternative medicine. And in the course of that, where we were studying medical literature, et cetera, I started seeing these really good studies of spiritual healing. This is back in the 1990s. And I kept thinking to myself, if you can have a thought and send it to someone else and make them better, then that undermines everything we think about how the world works. So I set out trying to figure out why that could work by talking to a lot of frontier scientists, physicists, biologists, et cetera, figuring they were going to tell me there's something like human energy fields. And what came out of that, what I realized soon enough, and I thought it was going to be an easy prospect, but I found that each of them had a little piece of what compounded into a completely new science, a new view of the world. So that book, that became the field. And that essentially hijacked me and changed the messenger because I then got consumed, fascinated, and involved in the science of spirituality. And it's been from there that probably just curiosity and wanting to know more and unfinished business that set me on the path with the intention experiment, the bond, and now my latest book, The Power of Eight.
So let's talk about the latest book. Do you have it somewhere in your hand?
Yeah, I do.
Pick it up, please.
Thank
And
you.
let's all see it, The Power of Eight by Lynne McTaggart. She's a pioneer in intention experiments and field experiments, consciousness field experiments. So there's the book, and it's available everywhere, right? We'll
Yeah.
show it again. I wish I had a copy right in front of me, but we'll show it and we'll put it there. So
Mhm.
tell us about this book, The Power of It.
Well, the Power of Eight grew out of my intention experiments since 2007. And that's probably around the time I came to see you. It was right after that when you started the Evolutionary Leaders, and I came to see you and a lot of other leaders like that. And I remember us talking about it. I was curious because there were a lot of scientists talking about and showing experiments showing that thoughts are an actual something with the capacity to change physical matter. So again, that hard-nosed reporter in me wanted to know, well, how far can we take this? Are we talking about just, shifting a quantum particle, or are we talking about curing cancer with our thoughts? And I was also very curious about what happens when lots of people are thinking the same thought at the same time. So by that time, I knew a lot of scientists in consciousness research in lots of prestigious universities. And I also had a lot of readers from the field. It was in 30 languages at that time. So I figured if I just put them together, I'd have this giant global laboratory to test this. And I wasn't really sure it was going to work. In fact, I was pretty sure it wasn't going to be a big effect, but we've run 36 experiments to date. Everything from trying to make plants grow faster. And what we would do is a scientist would set up a well-controlled experiment at one of the prestigious universities like Penn State, like University of California, University of Arizona, many in the UK, Princeton. In fact, one of the experiments was run by our mutual late friend Rustum Roy, Dr. Rustum Roy. But we did everything from little stuff like trying to make seeds grow faster to trying to move water over by 1 pH. And then we started doing things like peace experiments and lowering violence in war-torn areas and violent areas, and even trying to heal people, particularly in one instance, a Gulf War veteran of PTSD. And of those 36, 32 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. So that was pretty amazing to me. And back in 2008, I wanted to do something like this, scale it down into a workshop, but I wasn't really sure what to do. And so I was kicking this around with my husband, Brian Hubbard, one day, and I said, I don't know, maybe I'll put them in groups of 8 or so with and have them send healing intention to a member of the group with a health challenge. And my husband's also a journalist and a very good headline writer. And he said, I love it, the power of 8. And that is literally how it started, by complete accident. So we put people in groups. We had them send healing intention at our first workshop. It was Chicago. And I figured it was going to be a very mild healing of, feel good effect, like getting a back rub or having a facial. But that's not what happened. We did it one day, we had them come back the next day, and we asked the recipients to report on what had happened. And we got things like this. I have terrible knee arthritis and I'm walking normally today. I have terrible gut issues and my gut feels normal today. I have, migraines and my head's clear. One woman said, I have cataracts and they feel like they're 80% better. So I was very disbelieving of all of this. I thought, well, this is just a placebo effect, until I started running it over and over and over again and found that these little groups, while not everybody got healed, there were enough of these kind of instant healings or improvements to say something is going on here. It was pretty scary to me, though, Deepak, because I'm not, I have never put myself forward as a healer or anything like that. And so the book was really my attempt to understand it. It took me 10 years to get the courage to write that book. I kept putting it aside and putting it aside. But there were so many elements to why group intention is healing that I really wanted to find out.
Okay, so now we've covered your work. What is going on? So please tell me what your interpretation is, scientific, both for the field and the power of eight.
Okay. Well, there are a lot of elements to this, scientifically and otherwise. And as you know, and we've talked about, I'm very interested in consciousness research, as you are. Um, what we know is that we are all connected, that there is what I like to call a psychic internet that connects us all, that is non-local, that goes beyond time and even, space and even time. Now, to give you a wonderful example of that, as I told you, I've been doing these intention experiments. And back in 2007, I ran a seed experiment. I was in Sydney, Australia. The seeds were set up by a scientist at the University of Arizona, Dr. Gary Schwartz, whose lab set up 4 sets of seeds labeled A, B, C, D, sent me all 4 photos. We randomly chose one. The audience sent an intention to that set of seeds. We didn't tell the scientists which ones we were sending intention to. And when we were done, we called the scientists. That was their cue to plant all 4 sets of seeds, and they measured them 5 days later. Then we unblinded the study, and it turned out that the seeds that were given the intention, sent the intention, grew significantly higher than controls. Now, let's just unpack this for a second. First of all, me and my audience were in Sydney, Australia. The seeds were sitting in Tucson, Arizona, 8,000 miles away. And we weren't sending intention to the seeds. We were sending intention to a photograph of the seeds, a symbol of the seeds. Nevertheless, we had an effect. And we ran that 5 more times in different locations and also with my audience over the internet. And every single time, the seeds sent intention grew significantly higher than controls. So what I've seen with that, and what I've seen with other experiments using other scientists, people like Dr. Konstantin Korotkov, who measures subtle changes in the atmosphere, local atmosphere. He has equipment, and he's situated in St. Petersburg, Russia. Well, I just ran several experiments, but one I'll tell you about. I was in Miami, and we sent intention to a vial of water in St. Petersburg. And we had a massive shift in his equipment, what he calls the capacitance of his equipment, its ability, the ability of the atmosphere to store charge. So there is this extraordinary psychic internet that we create that I think is enhanced when we are all coming together with what is essentially secular prayer. So with our Power of 8 groups, there is the power of intention. There's no question that we are trespassers. Our thoughts are trespassers. That, we're all leaky buckets, and our thoughts can go into other places and affect other people and things. But also, there were other elements with our Power of 8 groups that I have witnessed. And one of the big elements about it is the power of altruism. Now, I run every year. I started doing this in 2015, really to try to understand what happens with these groups if they continue to meet week after week after week. Do they heal everything in their lives? Do they get a better response? What goes on if it's consistent? So the first year in 2015, I put people, I had a master class, a year-long class. So I taught them all the rudimentaries that I knew about intention, then put them into groups and had them work together while I monitored what was going on with them month by month by month. And I found that very quickly, people had remarkable healings, not only in their health, but also in their life. We had people like Mitchell Dean, who had lifelong depression, a clinical psychologist, so it was really awful for him, not a good look. And he not only healed that, but overcame writer's block, lost 15 pounds. Everything in his life kind of shifted into place. But some people weren't getting anywhere. So I remember saying to one woman, her name was Andy. Andy was a young woman who she was going through a divorce, had two young children, needed a job, and wasn't getting anywhere with her group. And we tried all kinds of stuff. And I finally just said, "Oh, Andy, get off of yourself. Start intending for someone else." And so she did. And I had uh, on my website, we do intentions of the week for three people with health challenges every week. And somebody had written in, a stepfather, about his 15-year-old stepson who had tried to commit suicide after breaking up with his first serious girlfriend. He was only 15, and in a fit of adolescent angst, threw himself off a 40-foot structure onto hard ground. So he broke everything in his body, and they didn't even think he was going to live. So our group sent healing intentions successive Sundays for him, while his stepfather kept a running commentary about what was going on. He seemed to improve very quickly at the time, and there were big jumps up in improvement at the times we did intention. And he got out of the hospital in record time. He's now a totally healthy 18-year-old. Now, maybe we did that, maybe we didn't, maybe it was just good doctoring. But what was fascinating to me is that the moment Andy got off of herself, she gets a call out of nowhere from someone she doesn't even know, offering her dream job. Now, that has happened too many times over the years for me to consider this coincidence anymore. So altruism plays a big part, Deepak. And I started looking at that. I started looking at the science of altruism. And it was really fascinating to me because altruism is like a bulletproof vest. People who do things for other people, no matter how tiny, live longer, healthier, happier lives. It's extraordinary. If you're ill and you help other people with the same illness, you are more likely to get better. And the science is very clear about it, that even one brilliant study I loved, looking at using prayer for depressives, found they got hold of, this was a psychologist who ran the study, who was also a priest, wanted to see if prayer could heal mental illness and not just physical illness, as has been demonstrated in other studies. So he got hold of 400 people with clinical depression, puts them into two groups, has one group getting the prayer and the other group giving the prayer. And afterward, he measured them through all kinds of psychological parameters. And he found that the people who received the prayer got better, but nowhere near as good or as improved as the people who had given the prayer. So that's a kind of perfect demonstration of the power of altruism. And there's a group effect too in these little small groups, what the psychologist Emile Durkheim called a collective effervescence. But there's also an X factor here that I can't explain, that is probably slightly beyond our understanding. But I think it has to do with entering into a state of oneness, where we move out of our corporeal sense of separation that we all swim around in, and we feel what oneness really feels like.
Okay, so Lynn, you've done an amazing job explaining your work, and the two books are very, very important books, The Field and The Power of Eight. I'd like our audience to read them if they have the time, ability, or desire. But let me explain to you why this work is important in shifting our paradigm and our understanding of what is reality. I'm going to share that with you, and then I'm going to ask you to briefly comment, and we can't go on for more than next 10, 15 minutes, even though this is a very fascinating conversation. So, as you know, I'm, of course, a student of Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism and all the non dual traditions. And I'm also a neuroendocrinologist by training, but in the last 30 years, focused only on unraveling the mystery of what we call reality. And it turns out it's 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 a mystery that appears unsolvable, but actually there's a very, very deep understanding of it in the traditions of yoga. So let me share with you that understanding. So right now in the world of science, the majority of scientists believe that matter is the ontological primitive of the universe, that physical matter, which means atoms, force fields, particles, wavicles, gravity, all of these somehow come about together to create everything that we call the universe. And as you know, this is called the hard problem of consciousness. How do force fields, atoms, molecules, brain activity, which is basically only the shift of ions across cell membranes, how does that create the experience of what we call the physical world? There's no explanation for that. And so there's another group of people, as you know, some of them we've engaged with, like philosophers like Bernardo Kastrup and many other idealists who say, no, the nature of the physical world is ideas and thoughts and feelings and emotions and images, what we call sensations, perceptions, images, feelings, thoughts, which are modified forms of consciousness. Therefore, mind is the only reality. Mind, thought is the only reality. Vedanta says no, both the mind and the physical world are symbolic representations of a deeper, non local, impersonal consciousness. Deeper, non local, impersonal consciousness. And for lack of a better word, it's called pure consciousness. Pure consciousness means it hasn't been conditioned by stories, whatever the story is. You know, you are telling me a story and I'm telling you a story. Pure consciousness is not being conditioned by economic stories, religious stories, ancestral stories, archetypal stories. All those are important in giving us the experience of the world, but they're stories. And what is real is just this thing called pure consciousness, which is irreducible, which is without cause, which has no existence in space or in time, which modifies itself simultaneously as thoughts, images, intentions, attention. That activity we call the mind, but it's a symbolic representation of consciousness modifying itself into an experience that we call mental experience. But it also simultaneously modifies itself into perceptions. So when you look at something, when I look at you at the screen, that requires attention, it requires intention. Because I could choose not to look at the screen. I could look there. I could look there. And between this look and that look is pure consciousness, which is doing the looking. Okay. But what you look at out there, this includes this. This is part of the activity. So this is not separate from that activity, or this activity, or the brain activity. It's one activity in consciousness, modifying itself as innumerable conditioned minds. The mind is individual, but it is a product of a conscious agent. The conscious agent, which religious traditions could call soul. I don't care what you call it. You and I are conscious agents having a unique experience, a unique mental experience, a unique what we call physical experience, but the physical experience is also mental activities, perceptual activity, consciousness modifying itself into hearing, into tasting, into touching, into sensation, into seeing. So in every experience, there are three components: a seer, a mode of seeing, and a scenery. So the seer is the individual knower. The seeing is the mode of knowing, and that which is seen, the scenery, is that which is known, all happening in the conditioned mind, which is like Plato's cave projecting symbols or images or illusions or virtual reality. So, right now, we're doing that. We're projecting virtual reality across the planet. Whoever is in this bandwidth of awareness, which is a very restricted bandwidth, Zoom, this link, whoever is within that is part of our collective consciousness right now. Okay. And each of us is a conscious agent, but even our physical body is part of the scenery. The mental body is part of the scenery as much as this book or this hand or this pen. They're all one unified experience, not interconnected, inseparable. Okay. So then, of course, when I talk to my Nobel laureate physicists, and I've been doing this week, they say that why can I wiggle my toes and I can't wiggle your toes? Okay. And this is a very valid point. I can pick this phone through an intention, but I can't pick it up through an intention. Very valid point. Okay. Why can't I experience right now exactly what you're thinking? Why can't I see the image exactly? For example, I'm imagining right now, even as I speak to you, I'm imagining the Empire State Building, but you didn't know that till I told you. So why can't you do that? This is very valid. So my answer to that is there are degrees of fulfillment of intentionality. Of course, I can lift my hand up like this, but I can also ask you, Lynn, will you please lift your hand up? And then you lift your hand up. So I'm influencing your consciousness. But even more than that, if you're experiencing trauma or pain, somebody hits you, I wince. Why? Because I feel the pain, that empathy, and there's a neural correlate, right? My limbic brain and your limbic brain synchronizes at that moment. I feel empathy. And then if I'm deeply resonating with you as a conscious agent at the level of the conditioned mind, if I'm deeply, then that elicits from me the desire to alleviate your suffering, which is called compassion, which you call altruism. And then I actually act on it. I do something, I act with love in action. And because I'm coming from a place of inseparability, not connectedness, inseparability, then that intention organizes its own fulfillment because it's all one field. As you say in your book, it's all one field. And it's not the electromagnetic field, even though the electromagnetic field is an agent. Right now, the electromagnetic field is an agent for us in this conversation. But behind that is a consciousness field. The Vedanta says in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna, who represents pure consciousness, speaks to Arjuna, who represents the spiritual warrior, but he's the conditioned mind. Okay. And he's confused. How do I win the battle? Because these enemies are actually my own shadows. He asked that question. And Lord Krishna says, I am the field and I am the knower of the field. Okay, so we are, as conscious agents, not only the field, we know the field as ourself, as our true self, beyond the ego mind. And so when we come collectively in that field, we influence the tickling, we tickle the field, and then the whole field reorganizes itself. So even as I'm speaking to you right now, actually, that's extrasensory. I'm moving right now just by speaking, and you're listening. I'm moving electrochemicals in your brain. And so are we moving electrochemicals in the brain of everybody who's watching us right now. So we are actually psychically influencing each other and changing the space-time geometry of the universe just in this conversation. So that's the basis. That's the basis of what we call the infinite organizing power of intention. That's the basis. So this field, this pure consciousness, not only is infinite possibilities, it's the source of attention and intention. It organizes its fulfillment through synchronicity, which is what you've been talking about, non-local correlation. And it is also, in a way, unpredictable, because without unpredictability, there's no creative power to intention. If everything is an algorithm, what's the creativity, right? So that's where we are.
Yeah,
Okay. And if you
absolutely.
agree with this model, then we have a nonprofit called neveralone.love. Look it up. It's for suicide prevention amongst teenagers and amongst other people. We even have an AI chatbot over there. If perhaps we could add to your experiments on intention through our nonprofit, it could help a lot of people with depression and suicidal ideation.
I would love to do that, and we can talk about that further. One of the things too that I've been experimenting with the intention experiment, and by the way, I just wanted to say that was wonderful, that whole description of connection and consciousness, so succinctly put, and tying it so much together. And it started me thinking too, that seems to be the experience that distinguishes between an intention that works and doesn't in these Power of Eight groups. Because the people, when they describe the people who are healed, let me give you an example. Maya, last summer, the last time I spoke in person before COVID, I had an audience of about 700, put them into groups at the end of my talk, asked them to do healing intention for a member of the group. One of them was a woman in a wheelchair. At the very end, I usually ask anybody got a comment and did anything happen? And Maya, this is the most dramatic one I've ever had, was told by her group to tell her story, and she got up out of her wheelchair. And, she was paralyzed from the neck down. I was so stunned by this. I called her afterward. I got hold of her number and said, what happened? What was the thing that changed? And she described having so much love coming from this group of strangers that she entered into a different state. And it was a state of essentially oneness, of really experiencing that. But it was almost too much for her. So she passed it on to another relative. And it was once again this kind of feeling of being out of her body and being at one with the universe. And the moment she did that, her wheelchair, the wheels of her wheelchair felt like they were going through the floor. And that seems to be a common description that people in these Power of Eight groups talk about is, and we saw this with brain research when we did some with Life University, largest chiropractic university in the world. They did some brain research on Power of Eight groups, and we found a lowering of all the parts of the brain that make us feel separate. For instance, like the parietal lobes that help us navigate through space. And what they concluded was that, and also parts of the brain that are involved with worry, doubt, negativity, these were people who were experiencing a state of oneness, very much like a Buddhist monk in the midst of ecstatic prayer. So I think it's getting out of that sense of separation, almost having a taste of what pure consciousness is, that proves to be this healer.
That's beautiful, Lynn. And we'd like to continue um, experiments with you if you're amenable, and see how we can enhance the power of intention to reach a critical mass. And I invite you to have a conversation with our CEO at the Chopra Foundation, uh, and one of the other founders of Never Alone, if you're amenable.
I would love to do that. And one of the things that I'm doing right now is intention experiments. I just ran one yesterday, bringing together polarized individuals. So
That's
yesterday we had Republicans, Democrats, African Americans, police, members of the police department, former jihadis, and people who believed that the election was a conspiracy, and all kinds of people together. And we did an intention together because, and I've done this earlier with Arabs and Israelis. We did a big one a couple of years ago.
let's do one together on peace, harmony, laughter, and love together for the world.
I would love to do that. That would be brilliant because something about this process seems to allow the heart to leap across the fence.
Amazing. Thank you, Lynne McTaggart. If you agree,